and the Caucasus. I wanted to say first why I was drawn to the era, why I spent 13 years working on this book. The first thing that drew me to it were these giant historical characters who appear on the canvas in this region. Winston Churchill, Theodore Roosevelt, Lenin, Stalin, of course, Brezhnev, Margaret Thatcher, Queen Elizabeth plays a cameo role in this region. But then when I really began reporting on it, reporting on the story, I found the truly interesting people, and they were the entrepreneurs, the guys who showed up throughout history in this region under their own steam, not connected to a country or a company, though they often claimed they were, and managed to insinuate themselves in the very biggest deals on the Caspian and become very close to the presidents of the countries. John Deuys. John Deuys showed up on the Caspian in about 1990. He's a Dutch oil trader. He made people very nervous. People thought he was a dangerous man. He had this strange scar crossing the back of his head, and the KGB, for some reason, was pursuing him all across Europe. There's something about $100 million debt he owed to somebody, and he showed up on the Caspian not as the Dutchman he was, but the official representative of the Sultanate of Oman. He had this unusual way of conducting his business negotiations. They were all men, oil being a man's world, and the men would be sitting in these tense negotiations. And suddenly the doors would open, and these beautiful, tall, slender models would walk in, speaking all the European languages, and sit down with the men for tea and lunch or whatever, and then at some unspoken signal, walk out again through that door, and the negotiations would resume. This whole show made the oil men, the Western oil men who had to deal with him, very nervous. He became the closest advisor at one time to the prime ministers of Russia and Kazakhstan. Jim Giffen. Jim Giffen was the biggest entrepreneur, the biggest privateer of them all. A Berkeley graduate. He came from small town roots in the Central Valley, but while at Berkeley, he met and married June Hopkins, the granddaughter of Harry Hopkins, the intimate of FDR. He had a personality that made older, very powerful men want to mentor him and take him under their wing. And he used that personality and this marriage to catapult himself into a deal-making role in the Soviet Union during the heady days of détente. And he stayed there. He stayed there through the whole Soviet period. The Soviet Union fell apart, and he launched himself into Kazakhstan, and, like Deuys, managed to become the chief oil advisor to the president. In the mid-1990s, Jim Giffen controlled the biggest oil deals in the whole world. An American who sat on the same side of the negotiating table as Giffen told me this genius that he had, the way he described it in this homespun way, of knowing exactly how much blood was in the turnip and how to squeeze that out. He, in 2004, was taking one of his routine trips to JFK on his way to Kazakhstan, and he was met by the FBI, and he was handcuffed. Giffen is awaiting trial in New York right now in the biggest foreign bribery case in U.S. history. He is accused of funneling $80 million in payments from the oil companies to the president of Kazakhstan. I call this period of American activity on the Caspian Sea one of the biggest American foreign policy successes of the last 10 years. And it all revolved around this pipeline. Starting, if I can make this work. Okay. Starting here in Baku on the Caspian Sea and connecting it to the Mediterranean Sea. 1,000-mile oil pipeline that came online last year and ships 1 million barrels a day. And I'll explain why later, why that's so important. The conventional wisdom about Russia and about Vladimir Putin is that the way to understand them and understand Russia and their foundation and what power is in Russia is the KGB state. That somehow that the so-called Siloviki, the successor agency to the KGB, and the military are the powers behind the throne, and one must understand that mentality in order to get what Russia is all about. I argue that this analysis, that one single entity survived from the rubble of the Soviet Union, the Siloviki, is wrong. There were two entities that survived from the rubble. The other one being the energy sector. Gazprom, the gas giant, and Transneft, the oil pipeline company. To understand what Russia is doing, what Putin is all about, how Putin intends to assert his power at home, abroad, and where Russia is going, if you can get these pipelines and look at the energy sector, it's all